Hey there, I'm Charlotte Reeves from Unleashed Education, and I've just recently upgraded my R5 to an R5 Mark II. Very exciting. So I put out a autofocus guide for setting up double back button focus for the R5 back when I got that in 2020. And I know there's many of you out there who would like the same thing for the Mark II. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do today. So there's also a few other settings that I do recommend when you set up your R5 Mark II. And so I'm going to dive into those as well. But firstly, I'm going to look at the autofocus settings because I know that's what you're all so eager to hear about. So let me just record my screen here. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to set up in the autofocus, so let's go back to the autofocus here. Okay, so the pink area is the autofocus. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you're on servo. You pretty much always should be shooting on servo because dogs, pets are moving animals and they will never stay still. So basically you're not shooting a still life. You shouldn't be on one shot. You should always be in servo. AF area. Now you want to be using the single point focus. I find that's the best starting point. That way you can tell the camera which point of the frame you want it to start looking for eyes and faces and things on. So put that on 1 point AF. And we also want the whole area tracking on. So you want the camera to be able to track whatever it is you want to focus on all around the frame from left to right, up and down. So that's what does that. Okay, next up we have the subject to detect, which is animals. We're shooting animals, we're pet photographers, so that makes sense. Eye detection on auto. I don't think there's really any benefit in setting up left eye or right eye when you're photographing pets. Any eye will do generally. And you don't need to register people because we're not photographing people, and that's mainly for sports and things anyway. I just leave it on case auto. There used to be a stack of different cases to be able to put it on. That's kind of left over from the non-mirrorless, the pre-mirrorless days. Leaving it on auto, I found, is generally fine. You can go into the manual settings so you can adjust the tracking sensitivity and the acceleration and the deceleration tracking. But I don't think you should really need to do that in most cases. So leave that on auto. I always put it on focus priority for this because I want the image to be in focus basically before it starts shooting. And in one shot, you're not shooting in one shot anyway, but just in case, put that on focus as well. So preview AF. Leave that on disable. That basically means that the camera is going to be focusing constantly when you're not actually asking it to, so you're not hitting any buttons. That's just going to chew through the battery. I don't really see any point in using that in our kind of use case. In the rest of the autofocus settings here, I don't limit which settings to use. I don't really see any point in doing that. I keep that as the same for both vertical and horizontal so that the focus point isn't changing around when you change from vertical to a horizontal shot. I don't limit the subjects to detect and we've spoken about the left and right eye detection. This can all just stay the same. And there's your autofocus settings. Now that isn't all you need to set up for the autofocus settings. You also need to go into the custom controls. So let's head across to there. All right, so we need to customize the buttons for shooting. Now, what I'm going to go through here is what I call double back button focus. So essentially, you are removing the ability for the camera to focus when you touch the shutter button. You don't want it focusing when you hit the shutter. You only want the focusing to happen through one of two buttons on the back. The main one being the AF on button, and the secondary one being the little asterisk button, which is the AE lock button, I think. So the AF on button is going to be your main autofocus button. It's the most ergonomic position on the back of the camera for your thumb. So that's going to be set to single point, but also with the animal eye detection tracking enabled. So it's going to be able to lock onto the eye and then track it as it moves from left to right, up and down within the frame. So the other button there is going to be set to just using a single point without the tracking. And this comes in really handy when the animal eye tracking fails, which occasionally it will. You need to just revert to that single point. So let's go in and set that up. So go into customize buttons for shooting. First thing we need to do is take the focus off the shutter button. So it'll be set to either this or this, generally metering and AF start. You want to set that to just metering start. So the only thing that the shutter button does is start the metering, but also just take the photo. You don't want it focusing. Next, we're going to go down to the AF on button. Now I have the eye control set up. So I have this set to this setting, which basically means that when my eye moves around the frame, it will then move the focus point to that point and start focusing from that point. The eye control may or may not work for you. I recommend setting it up and calibrating it and seeing if it works. It's fun to play around with. At the moment, it's working pretty well for me. I need to do further testing though, so don't hold me to that. So if you're not using the eye control, you want to have this set on just good old metering and AF start. But I'm going to set it back to this one. So the next one down, so this is your AE lock button. So that's a little asterisk button next to the AF on button. And this is the one that you're going to be setting up to use just single point without the tracking. So you need to go into here, set this to metering and AF start. So you want it to start autofocus when you hit that button. And then you need to hit info on the back of the camera. There's a little button called info. So hit that. And this is where you can go in and fine tune the settings for this. So basically the only thing you're going to be wanting to change is AF area. So if you use the little scroll on your thumb on the back of the camera, that takes you up and down. If you use the finger scroll near the shutter button, that takes you across. So tick that, go across. So it's just 1 point AF without the tracking. So that's the only thing that we need to change with that. That's the only thing we need to tick. Everything else stays the same. All you're doing is taking the tracking off and just using a single point. So we just need to hit menu to go back there, and then menu again to go back again. So there's a couple of other things that I would set up in this area, but we're just going to do the autofocus stuff first, and then I'll go into that later. So, I mean, basically, that's pretty much set up to use the double back button focus now. So let's take a look and see what that does. Now I'm just in my office at the moment, and I'm just going to, I've got a few portraits of dogs over here, so they're good to test things out on. I'll just give that a little bit of extra exposure so we can kind of see it a bit more easily. So as you can see, I haven't pressed anything yet, and it's detected an eye already. I haven't started focusing. I've gone past Opal's face. It's detected her face. It's detected Fletcher's face and then his eye. And then it detected Luna, this is just a painting, but Luna's face and then her eye. So actually there's one more thing that we need to set up, and I don't think it's set up by standard. So let's go in and quickly do this now. So go back into the customize buttons, go down the list here, and it's this one here. So this is your multi-controller. So this is the little toggle next to the AF on button on the back of your camera, and that allows you to move that focus point around. So I'm going to go in there and just make sure that's set to direct AF point selection, not off. So we need to turn that on. I don't think that's set up that way from factory, so just make sure that that's set up like that. Okay, back to the shooting. All right, so we can use that controller on the back to move this around. But I basically usually just have it set in the center. So to set it in the center, say it's up in the corner here, sometimes you lose it. Sometimes it can be right down the bottom and you lose it. So a way to get it back to center is to just click in the middle, and that just sets it back to the center, and it's got a little dot in the middle to tell you it's in the center. So I'm looking at my screen down here, which is why I'm not looking at the camera. I've got a little screen recorder here. So all right, so if I frame it so that that little spot is over Fletcher, and then I hit the AF on button, that has immediately locked onto his eye. Now with that AF on button held down, I can move all around and reframe, and it will keep it on his eye. And then I can just shoot whenever I want to take a photo, keeping the AF on button held down the whole time. Now, if I want to then focus on Opal, I'll just need to move that spot over Opal, hold the AF on button down, and now it's locked onto her face, and I can shoot on her face, or I can go over onto Luna and it's found her eye straight away. Now, if that's not working very well, and cases in which it might not work well is if you're shooting action, if you're shooting in low light, say a black dog in low light, or maybe a dog with hair over its eyes that the camera can't really see very well, you're going to want to change it to the other back button and just use a single point. And this is the way I always used to focus pre-mirrorless. So if we need to do that, let's just say we want to focus on Luna's face and keep it on Luna's face, but we want her on the left-hand side. So instead of hitting the AF on button, this time I'm going to hit the little asterisk button, so that AE lock button. And I'm going to make sure that's on her face. Now it's up to me in this case to keep that framing so that's on her face. Because if I move off to the side and reframe, it's just going to focus on whatever is underneath that square. So say the keyboard, say this, say something over here, a plant. It's just going to keep focusing on that. See how it's not tracking the faces? So that can come in handy when the tracking fails. And then if I want to go back to the eye detection and the tracking, let's just put that focus point back in the middle. You don't have to, but I find it works better that way. You can just go back to this and I can focus on Fletcher, I can focus on Opal, I can focus on Luna. There we go. So all it is a matter of just changing your thumb to hit the, let me see if we can focus on the treat jar here. Hit the asterisk instead. There we go. And then if I move that, it's a little bit close actually. If I move that, it's gonna just keep focusing on whatever's underneath it. So that's the way you used to focus basically. It's going back to the pre-mirrorless days. And then back to the animal eye. There we go. So that's the autofocus setup. There's a few other little settings I'd like to go through, just little customizations that I've made that work for me, that may work for you, that you can implement if you would like. So let's go back into the menu. Let's just go right back to the start here. Okay, so I'm pretty much always shooting in RAW. So I always have this set to RAW and full cropping or aspect ratio. Nothing in here. I don't think I'd change anything in there. Picture style, standard. So that's basically just what you get shown on the back of the camera. So if you take your images into Lightroom, you can change that picture style to whatever you want it to. It's not locked in just because you've got it set on your camera. It's basically just what it shows you on the back screen of the camera as you're shooting. Color space. Now I have this set to Adobe RGB, and the reason I have it set to that is because it's actually a wider color space. I always work in sRGB when I'm editing, when I'm exporting files, all that kind of stuff on the computer. But Adobe RGB just captures the image in a wider range of colors. And I do this to kind of future-proof my files. So if RGB somehow gets better in the future, or if a new color profile comes out that actually uses more of those colors, all my raw files have been shot in Adobe RGB. So they've been shot in the wider color space. So anyway, that's a whole other topic, but Adobe RGB is what I have it set to. So white balance, always on auto. I don't think there's anything else in here that I change. Now the drive mode and also the shutter mode. So I have the drive mode. So when I'm shooting portraits, I have the drive mode just set to single so that I'm not taking multiple shots all the time. And I also have the shutter mode set to mechanical. Now, if I'm shooting action, I will then change that to electronic because it's a much higher frame rate, which is perfect for shooting action. I don't ever use electric first curtain because it messes up the bokeh. It does weird stuff to the bokeh. So don't ever use that. Not good. Either mechanical or electronic. And then if I'm shooting action, I will change the drive mode, I will change the drive mode to high speed continuous, and I will change the shutter mode to electronic. So that's action. So I've got some quick sort of shortcuts set up to do that without having to go through the menus. I'll show you those in a sec. So let's just change that back. The reason I don't leave it on electronic all the time is because it doesn't give you a shutter sound, and it's really difficult to tell when you're actually taking the photo, and it just rattles off 20 photos in a row, and then you've got to go and delete them all. So I'm not quite used to keeping my camera in electronic all the time. You can customize your quick controls. I won't go into that. So image review. So I hate it when cameras always ship to show the image on the back of the screen as soon as you've taken it. This really annoys me because I want to just take the next photo. I don't necessarily always want to see the photo I've just taken on the back of the screen. So I set that image review duration to off, and I also set the viewfinder display to disable because I don't want it popping up in the viewfinder either. I want to determine when the image comes up for me to look at. I don't want the camera just throwing it at me when I'm not ready for it. So turn that all off. You can customize the shooting info display. So basically what shows on the screen as you're shooting. That's a very personal thing. You can go in and fiddle around with that stuff. I highly recommend downloading the manual. They don't actually give you a printed manual anymore these days, but you can download a PDF of the manual and you can go in and see exactly how to set up all of this stuff if you want to customize it further, but I won't go into that now. AF, we've gone through that whole AF section already. There's nothing to change in the play here, I don't think. Oh, except for this setting. So magnification. So this is basically when you click to magnify the image that you're viewing on the back of the screen. So you've taken an image, you're looking at it, you want to magnify it. This will magnify the actual size, so the 1:1 pixel size, so basically at 100%. Because whenever I'm magnifying an image on the back of the camera, I'm checking for focus and I want to see it at 100%. So I always put that on actual size. The magnified position from the focus point. So you want to magnify it, so zoom in to the focus point because you're checking for focus. So that makes sense as well. Not always the center. Okay, so these are a couple of handy little settings. So this is basically your blinkies, so your highlight alerts. So you want to have this enabled because it helps you see if your exposure needs adjusting because you're, say, blowing out something in the image. Often you'll take an image and if it's got some sky or some bright bokeh in it, that will flash. It will flash and overlay on the screen. It's black on the Canon cameras. Basically, you'd want to just make sure that it's not flashing on the important parts of the image, which is generally, say, if you're photographing a white dog, you don't want to see that flashing anywhere on the white dog because it means you've blown out the highlights, basically. So enable that. Autofocus point display, enable that as well. So that means when you're reviewing images on the back of the camera, it will actually show you which point the camera ended up focusing on. So that's handy to see. All right, now this is all network type stuff. These cameras are pretty tricky, so you can actually connect to a smartphone, which is really cool. You can go here and change the camera name and all that sort of stuff. So it's just fun stuff to set up. I've set it up to connect to the smartphone, to my phone, but I don't really use it because I always just put my images on the computer. But if you're someone who likes to look at the images on your phone, say you're on the way home from a shoot or something like that, that could be a handy thing to set up that this camera is capable of. And nothing else in there. So date and time, make sure you got your date and time set up. That's always important. Don't not do that. Now screen brightness and viewfinder brightness. So if you are out shooting and the images look great on the back of your camera and you're like, oh yeah, my exposures are really spot on. And then you get them on your computer, you're looking at them in Lightroom and you're like, oh, why are they all so dark? This is not right. This is not how they looked on the back of the camera. Perhaps you might need to change your screen brightness on the back of the camera to match what you're seeing on the computer. Best thing to do, hold up your camera next to your computer monitor and adjust that brightness level until it looks right, until it looks the same as what you're seeing on your computer. Now you also should be referring to your histogram as you're shooting because that will give you an idea if your exposures are correct or not. But histograms are a whole other thing that I'm not going to go into right now. Also with the viewfinder brightness as well, I've got it set to auto. It seems to be doing a pretty good job of giving me an accurate result through the viewfinder. If I run into any problems with that, you can also just put it into manual and then adjust it manually. Don't think there's anything else in here that we need to worry about. Nothing else in here. Obviously your firmware should always be up to date. It's really easy. You just whack it on your card and then put the card in the camera and tell it to do a firmware update. All the instructions are on the website. Having said that, I haven't done that yet, but it's something that's on my list to do with this camera very soon. All right, so I said that we'd look into customized buttons for shooting. So let's have a look and see what else we can do in here. Now you'll notice there's two columns here. So there's a left-hand column, which is for when you're shooting stills. There's a right-hand column for when you're shooting video. I don't really shoot video that much. I haven't really seen any need to customize any of those buttons. So when you're changing stuff here, do make sure you're sticking to the left column, because anything you do in the right column is not going to affect what happens when you're taking stills. I don't think I've really changed anything. You want to make sure that the AF point selection is linked up. I think maybe sometimes this is off when you get a new camera. So basically that's just that little button next to the asterisk button on the back of your camera. And that will basically just allow you to select an autofocus point if you want to change it from single point to something else. Now, this set button on the back of the camera. So I find the play button a little bit harder to hit because it's a bit smaller and it's right down the bottom of the camera. So when I'm reviewing images that I've just taken, I like to hit the set button, and that will do image replay. So you can set that button to all sorts of different things. Image replay works really well for me. And because I set that magnification setting up before, when I hit that, I can zoom in straight away. So let me just show you how that works. So say I'm shooting and I want to have a look at the images that I've just taken. I can hit the set button. It will show me the last image that I took. I hit the set button again and it zooms straight in at 100% to the focus point. So if I go across to the next one, hit the set button again, and it zoomed in straight to the focus point. And I find that's a really quick way to review your images and to check and make sure that they're in focus. Okay, back to the menu. So another thing that it may be something that you might want to look into if it makes sense to you. It's good to know it exists. Is how you change your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So I find that I'm adjusting ISO the most, shutter speed next, and then aperture the least. So I want to put aperture on the dial that's less intuitive for me to move all the time, which is the mode dial at the top. It's the dial around the little mode button on the top of the camera. So I've got aperture on that one. I've got shutter speed on the front dial, and I've got ISO on the back dial. I find my thumb is sort of hovering around the back more, and so ISO gets changed the most, so it's the most convenient kind of dial for changing the ISO. I forget quite how it's set up from factory. I think a couple of those settings are switched from factory, but anyway, that's how I set it up. It's how it makes sense to me, and it's good to know that you can change that if you want to. I don't change any of the directions or anything. I disable the touch shutter. I don't want it taking photos when I touch the back of the screen. I don't think there's anything else in here that we need. Okay, so this is where you set up the eye control. So I have this turned on and I have gone in and calibrated this. Now I can't show you the calibration process because I'm using the screen recorder, and you need to actually look through the viewfinder to do this. I also will note that when you're using eye control, it only works when your eye is up to the viewfinder. If you're shooting with the flippy screen, if you're shooting with the LCD on the back of the camera, the eye control obviously isn't going to work. So it's only when you're holding the camera up to your face that works. Just something to keep in mind. So you will need to go in and calibrate that. I recommend calibrating it multiple times. Refer to the manual. And I say multiple times because apparently it gets more accurate if you do it a bunch of different times. It gets used to your eye. The data is better. Something like that. So I have that set up. It's working really well. Just turn it off if you wear glasses or something and you don't want to set that up. I don't think it works very well if you wear glasses, just what I've been told by people who do. So that's your eye control. I don't think I've really changed anything in any of these. Let me just have a really quick look through any of these. I don't limit anything. All right, I don't think there's anything else in there. So this quick menu, this My Menu, you can add things to this menu that you use most often that you don't want to trawl through menus to get to. You can refer to your manual on how to set this up, but I've basically added a few things that I use most often. So the eye control, if I want to turn it off quickly, I can quite easily just go in there and turn that off. The drive mode. I also have the drive mode customized for the little button on the front of your camera, just here, because I find that's an easy way to select the drive mode. You can go in and set that up in your customized buttons. Shutter mode, mechanical, I might want to quickly change that from mechanical to electronic or back again, just in case I'm photographing anything other than animals, which isn't often. Say people, for example, I might want to change that quickly to a different setting. And then format card, I find it's easier to have in that quick menu. That's basically it. That's quite a long video, but I really hope that helps. If you have got any questions about the autofocus, rewatch the autofocus section. I'm pretty sure I covered it all there, or just let me know, send me a message, post a comment, and I'll try and get back to you. If you are asking for help, it's always handy to be able to see a screenshot of even if you just use your phone to take a picture of the back of the camera, seeing the settings that you have set up already is really helpful, because often it's quite easy to diagnose any issues through that. Yeah, thanks for joining me, and enjoy your new R5 Mark II. And this also applies to the R6 Mark II, I believe, and also the R1 and R3. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure it's the same settings, same autofocus system. So you should be good to go with those cameras as well. Yeah, this has been good. I'll catch you later. Bye.